Are you late, or are you calling me a liar?" The sentence hit the air like a slap, slicing through the quiet tension of the pizza store. All eyes snapped toward the delivery guy, Jason, who stood frozen in place as if someone had just stripped away his dignity in front of everyone. He had just come off a grueling 12-hour night shift. No time to even sip water, no chance to check the cheap watch on his wrist, the same one that had stopped ticking the week before. But what cut deeper than the thirst or the aching legs was the humiliation. He clenched his jaw, looked down, and said nothing. Not because he was wrong, but because in this job, silence was sometimes the only shield you had left. What Jason didn't know was that the man standing quietly in the far corner, arms crossed, face unreadable, wasn't just another customer. He was Jackson Reeves, the CEO of the very pizza chain Jason worked for. A man who had built this business from the ground up, from a single walk-up window to an empire that once stood for integrity and pride. And now, that very man stood silently watching as his creation decayed from the inside. Though the insult wasn't aimed at Jackson, it struck him squarely in the heart. He didn't step in, didn't lash out, he just clenched his fists. Partly from anger, mostly from sorrow. Because Jackson knew what it felt like to be disrespected in a job you'd poured your soul into. A part of him wanted to speak up, to shield Jason in that moment, but another part, the seasoned leader who had weathered storms, understood. If he truly wanted to save what he had built, he couldn't react on impulse. He needed to understand the full scope of the rot. Minutes later, the man with the real power made his move. Not with loud commands, but with the silent resolve of someone watching their life's work slowly slip away. Jason remained where he was, swallowing the shame tightening in his throat. But for Jackson, something shifted. He knew the road to redemption would be long, but he was ready to walk it, no matter the cost. There were no complaints, no bitterness in Jason's voice, just exhaustion, pure and raw, weighing heavy in every word and glance. He looked down and murmured, "It's been a rough night." His lips twitched into a thin, tired smile. "We were supposed to have 3 delivery guys tonight. 1 quit, 1 called in sick, so now it's just me." Jackson tilted his head slightly. 1 person covering an entire delivery zone? The layers began to peel back, revealing a truth far uglier than any paper report had shown. Jason shrugged with a strange calm. "I need the hours, as many as I can get." Silence stretched between them. Jackson hesitated, then asked, "Are they at least paying you overtime?" Jason's face shifted. The smile disappeared. He turned his head and answered quietly, "Technically, yeah, but my manager cuts my hours on other days so I don't get classified as full-time. Says it's company policy." Jackson's chest tightened, a deep, slow ache. That wasn't policy. That was theft. And Jason, the worn-out young man with dark rings under his eyes and a crumpled uniform, wasn't just tired. He was proof. Proof that something had rotted deep in the bones of the business Jackson once proudly called his own. "What's your name?" Jackson asked, voice low but firm. "Jason," the young man replied. That name imprinted itself into Jackson's mind, sharp and unshakable, like a warning etched into stone. Jackson stood still in the doorway, cold pizza box in hand, but all his focus rested on Jason. Jason didn't flinch, didn't apologize, just stood there absorbing the weight of it all, the way only someone who's been overworked and overlooked can. Jackson didn't just see an employee. He saw a young man quietly standing against a system designed to wear him down. The way Jason shifted his weight from foot to foot, like his body was fighting collapse while still trying to stay respectful, spoke volumes. He'd lived through nights that would crush most people, and he was still standing. After a long pause, Jason managed a faint, tired smile. "Anyway, hope the pizza's still good?" Sorry for being late." Jackson gave a simple nod. "Thanks." Jason turned and slowly walked back toward an old battered Corolla parked at the curb. The passenger door was taped shut with clear plastic. The engine coughed and wheezed, like it, too, was just barely holding on. Jackson closed the door behind him and gently placed the pizza box on the table. But he didn't open it. The hunger had faded. What remained was a hollow ache, one that only those who had poured their soul into a dream could truly understand. Jason's words. Technically, yeah, but they cut my hours, echoed in his mind. That wasn't how this company was supposed to run. Jackson had written the policy himself. Any overtime worked must be paid in full. No loopholes, no games. But rules on paper meant nothing if managers like Rick Turner treated them like meaningless scraps. Jackson pulled out his phone and opened the store's online reviews. The latest ones were nearly word-for-word reenactments of what Jason had just experienced. Pizza was 45 minutes late and ice cold. The delivery guy looked so tired I felt bad even complaining. Manager yelled at staff in front of customers. Totally unprofessional. Then one review, dated 3 days ago, made him stop cold. I saw the manager scream at a teenage worker for messing up a sauce. It wasn't even a big deal, but he yelled, "If you can't do the basics, maybe go mop floors instead." It was awful to watch. I won't be coming back. Jackson clenched his jaw. This wasn't just bad management. This was abuse. Abuse of trust, of people, and of the very name he had spent his life building. The next morning, long before the sun crept over the city skyline, Jackson left his house. No disguise this time, no glasses, no wig, no hoodie. Just a dark navy t-shirt, a pair of worn jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. He wasn't showing up as a hidden CEO today. He was walking into the storm as himself, with no mask, no hesitation, and no more distance. This time, he wasn't an outsider. This time, Jackson Reeves was stepping into the fire, with his name, his purpose, and his past on the line. The parking lot at store number 17 was nearly empty, like a theater after a closing act. A few old cars sat scattered under flickering lights. The building looked tired. The red trim had faded to pink in the sunlight. One of the outdoor menu signs blinked sporadically from a dying bulb, a quiet metaphor for a system slowly crumbling from within. He pushed open the front door. The scent of burnt garlic cheese and overworked dough hit him instantly, familiar and nostalgic, but now tinged with something sour, something lost. The tile floors were sticky and hadn't seen a mop in days. The front counter was unmanned. After a long moment, a young girl stepped out from the back, barely 18 or 19. Her name tag read Alyssa, hanging loose from her uniform. She didn't smile, didn't make eye contact. Her face was drained of any emotion. "Hey there," Jackson said softly, just grabbing a slice and a drink. Alyssa nodded, punched keys on the register like she'd done it 1,000 times in silence. She handed him a paper cup and moved on. No words, no spark. Jackson took his tray and walked to a booth near the kitchen window, far enough not to attract attention, close enough to hear. Didn't take long. From the back, a voice cut through the walls like a blade. "This dough is garbage. Third time, do it wrong again, and you're staying late. No questions." That voice, sharp, angry, soaked in contempt, belonged to Rick Turner. Jackson recognized it immediately. Mid-40s, grease-stained shirt, the kind of manager who walked into a room and everyone braced for impact. The young male employee flinched. Hands shaking, he tossed the ruined dough into the trash, trying to make himself small. No guidance, no coaching, just pure dominance. Power without purpose, control without compassion. And Jackson, sitting quietly in the booth, had seen enough to know this wasn't just a store in decline. It was a crisis born from indifference. And Jason walked in. He looked worse than the night before. Same wrinkled uniform. The dark circles under his eyes were so pronounced, it almost hurt to look at him. His steps were slow, dragging, like every bone in his body was pleading for rest. "You're back already?" Alyssa asked, not even looking up from the counter. Jason nodded. "Picked up another shift. I need the money." Jackson clenched his fist silently. Rick emerged from the kitchen, narrowing his eyes the moment he spotted Jason. "You're late," he barked. Jason blinked, confused. "No, I was scheduled for noon." Rick stepped closer, voice rising. "I told you yesterday to be here at 11. Don't play dumb with me." Jason didn't flinch. "You didn't say that yesterday." "Oh, so now I'm a liar?" Rick snapped, the words slicing through the air like shattered glass. No one spoke. No one stepped in. Alyssa looked down at the register, her face empty. Jason stood silently by the drink station, an unopened water bottle still in his hand. But someone had reached their limit. Jackson stood up. His movement was slow, deliberate. Each step toward the counter sounded like a drumbeat of rising fury. His footsteps weren't loud, but they carried the weight of 1,000 silent observations. Rick turned, catching sight of a man in a plain t-shirt and baseball cap. Just another customer, or so he thought. "Can I help you?" Rick asked, irritation creeping into his voice. Jackson didn't blink. "Yeah, you can explain why you're treating my employees like that." The words hit like a thunderclap. Alyssa's eyes widened. Jason stiffened. The water bottle slipped slightly in his grip. Rick froze. First came confusion, then suspicion. "Sorry, who are you?" Jackson pulled off his cap. "Feeling engulfs the realm. Recognize me now." Rick's face drained of color. He looked like the blood had been vacuumed from his body. "They have discovered, Reeves, And that," Jackson interrupted, his voice sharp and cutting, "is exactly why I'm here. Because I shouldn't have to show up in person for my people to be treated with basic human decency." The store went silent. Even the hum of the pizza oven seemed to vanish, every eye locked on the man who just minutes ago was invisible. Rick, the same man who had barked orders, dismissed complaints, and ruled with a clenched jaw, now looked like a schoolboy caught in a lie. Jackson walked toward the back. "Let's talk in the office." Rick swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Yes, sir." Every step he took down the hallway felt like it carried the weight of every poor decision, every insult hurled, every hour unfairly cut. Jason watched him go, his expression unreadable. Even now, it felt so real. Alyssa stood frozen, hands still on the register, eyes staring into nothing. The back office was exactly as Jackson remembered it. Stale air, the musty smell of old cheese and mildew, cluttered with outdated calendars and crooked frames. It felt like the soul of the place had given up years ago. Rick turned, trying to reassemble the confidence he once wielded. "I didn't know you were coming. If someone had given me a heads up." "That's the problem," Jackson said coldly. "If people only behave when they know the boss is watching, that's not culture, that's performance." Rick's defenses flared. "You don't know what it's like down here. These kids show up late, don't care, expect everything handed to them." "Strange," Jackson interrupted, stepping in closer, his voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "Because I just watched a kid named Jason cover the entire delivery route alone, pull a double shift, and still come in today. I saw a cashier so exhausted she could barely lift her head. But what I didn't see, Rick, was a single shred of leadership from you." Rick clenched his jaw. "You don't understand. I've just been trying to keep this place afloat. One guy walked out mid-shift. We're short on supplies." "Stop," Jackson cut him off. "I've read the complaints. Cold pizzas, missing toppings, rude service, and they all have one thing in common: management. Rick went silent. His jaw twitched, but no words came out. "You've been cutting hours to avoid paying overtime," Jackson continued, his voice icy. "That's not company policy. That's your policy. You're playing games with people's livelihoods." Rick's face darkened. "So what? You think you can do better than me? Be my guest." Jackson didn't flinch. "I will, starting today." The air grew dense with silence. The arrogance in Rick's eyes began to crack. The realization was setting in. "You're firing me?" "Effective immediately. Clean out your stuff. You don't belong here anymore." Rick let out a bitter breath, lips trembling with rage. "You think firing me fixes everything? Good luck with this mess." Jackson didn't blink. His eyes never left Rick's. "It's not everything, but it's the first step." Rick let out a sharp, bitter laugh, shoved the office door open, and stormed out. His footsteps pounded against the tile like a petty, angry goodbye. Jackson stood in the quiet office for a moment longer. He took a slow breath, trying to steady the storm within him. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The first real move toward making things right. Out in the store, the silence was palpable. Alyssa stood still behind the register. Jason stood with his arms crossed a few feet away. Trey, by the dough station, hadn't moved an inch, but every single person felt it. Something irreversible had just happened. Jackson stepped out of the office. He looked at each of them, not as a boss looks at employees, but as a man seeing value in other people. No showmanship, no corporate tone, just truth. "I'll keep this short," he said. "This store has been run the wrong way for far too long." Jackson's voice wasn't loud, but it hit like a hammer. "And that ends today." No one moved. No one spoke. But it wasn't fear holding them still. It was something else. Something fragile. Hope. Elisa hesitated, then asked quietly, almost afraid to believe it, "He's really gone?" Jackson nodded. "Yes, and from now on, things will be different." Jason stood by the counter. His shoulders dropped slightly, just enough to suggest relief, but the cautious look in his eyes remained. Hope had returned, but the scars were still fresh. "Different how?" he asked, voice steady. Jackson didn't hesitate. No more cutting hours to dodge overtime. No more yelling at workers like they don't matter. No more understaffed shifts while management hides in the back office. The room stayed quiet. But this silence felt different. Not empty, attentive. Something had changed. They were listening. Not because they had to, but because maybe, just maybe, they wanted to. "I'm not here to give a speech and disappear," Jackson said. "I'm staying today. I want to work beside you. I want to see what it's really like, and I want to listen." Jason raised an eyebrow. "You're working with us?" Jackson nodded. "Starting now." A pause, then, for the first time all day, Jason cracked a smile. Not wide, not showy, just real, tired, but honest. Jackson rolled up his sleeves and stepped behind the counter. Eyes darted across the room. Elisa, Trey, the other staff who had stood frozen until now, watching the CEO in a t-shirt ask for an apron. It didn't feel real. And yet, there he was. Elisa blinked, then handed him a slip from the register. "Takeout order. Just a cheese pizza." Jackson took the slip and turned to Jason. "Show me how you all do it." Jason hesitated for a moment, then offered a slight nod. He stepped over to the dough station, pulled out a cold round of dough from the fridge, and laid it on the floured counter. His motions were deliberate, almost graceful. He stretched the dough, flipped it gently, then tossed it in the air, as though that simple circle of dough was the only thing still free in a life weighed down by pressure. Jackson watched every movement. There was care and rhythm in those hands. No step felt routine. When Jason gestured for him to try, Jackson moved forward. For the first time he touched the dough, it wasn't just flour and water. It was hours of grind, pride, and dignity. Jackson tried spinning it, but the dough landed lopsided and uneven. Jason gave a low chuckle. Not bad for a rookie. Jackson returned the smile, feeling neither embarrassed nor boastful. Instead, he felt gratitude. Grateful for this raw honesty and the chance to start fixing things the right way. For the next several hours, Jackson dove in. He answered phones, folded pizza boxes, packed delivery bags, even hopped into the car with Jason for 2 drop-offs, one to a small apartment where a newborn awaited dinner, the other to an elderly man who tipped Jason with loose change and a warm smile. It wasn't just work. It was living proof of who these people really were, their resilience, their dedication. It was invaluable. Back at the store, Jackson gathered the team in the break area. The lunch rush had passed. The air was thick with the smell of garlic and flour. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. "All right," he began, standing near the soda fountain. "I've seen enough to know you're giving so much more than you're getting in return. So here's what's changing, starting today." All eyes were fixed on him. First, every hour of overtime worked will be paid, every single time, no exceptions. The quiet murmur passed through the group. Alyssa glanced at Jason, who gave a small, relieved nod. Second, we're hiring more staff. Jason can't keep doing deliveries solo, and the kitchen shouldn't be short-handed week after week. Trey nodded, an unspoken show of agreement and hope. Third, this store needs a manager who actually values people. Until we bring that person on board, I'm coming by regularly, no more hiding in the office. A young team member, a voice weaving through the tense silence, finally spoke. "You really will come back?" Jackson looked at him directly, without hesitation. "I built this company with my own 2 hands. Somewhere along the way, I forgot the part that matters most. That stops here." In that moment, something released, not just in the store, but in the people, not in slogans, not in speeches, but in real, tangible action. The rest of the afternoon carried on quietly. A trickle of early dinner customers drifted in. Most staff were behind the counter, prepping, tidying up, stealing rare moments to breathe. Jackson sat alone in the booth by the window, dusting flour from his forearms. He watched the shop buzz with steady life, relaxed yet purposeful. Jason approached, still in his delivery shirt and bag strap across his chest. Jackson's voice was low and sincere. "You ever think about quitting?" Jason didn't answer right away. He shifted his weight, let out a long breath, and ran a hand through his hair. "Yeah, honestly." I came close. Jackson nodded, never taking his eyes off him. "I don't blame you, but I want to make this place one worth sticking around for." Jason met his gaze, his eyes guarded but open. "If things really change," he paused, searching Jackson's face, "then I'll stay." Jackson extended his hand. No corporate fanfare, no grand speech, just a firm, honest gesture. Jason looked at it, then closed the gap and shook it. Firm, determined. That quiet handshake, no words, carried the promise of something real. The message was short, firm, uncompromising. Any store found manipulating schedules to avoid paying overtime will be inspected immediately and face disciplinary action. No exceptions. Treating our people with dignity is not a slogan, it's mandatory. The next morning, Jackson arrived at store 17 before sunrise. The mingled scents of rising dough and tangy tomato sauce hung in the air, nostalgic, yet raw. Elisa was slicing peppers, Trey was rolling dough, Jason was sorting delivery bags by zip code. Jackson stepped in quietly and observed for a moment before speaking. "You ever think about being a manager?" Jason looked up, taken aback. "Me?" Jackson nodded. "You know this place. You see what's broken. And most importantly, you care." Jason hesitated. "Honestly, I've never seen myself as that kind of person. I've always just tried to survive each day." Jackson folded his arms, his gaze serious yet sincere. "You pulled a double shift then, still showed up the next day. You spoke up when things weren't right. That is the kind of person who should run this place." Jason swept his eyes around the store, the same place he almost walked away from, but now brimming with new energy. Alyssa was smiling gently at Trey near the oven. The old tension that once weighed heavily in the air had lifted. "But," Jason said slowly, "if I do take it, I need to know it comes with real change. I can't keep enforcing things that broke people." Jackson didn't hesitate. "Fair enough. If you step up, you'll have a direct line to me. No middlemen, no messages lost in the chain. If something's wrong, you tell me." Jason thought for a moment, then nodded deliberately. "Okay, I'll give it a shot." Jackson extended his hand. This time, Jason took it immediately. This wasn't just a handshake. It was a beginning. Real transformation doesn't happen overnight. But this was the start. Steady, quiet. Store 17 began to change, and Jackson stayed involved. Not as a distant executive, but as part of the team. Jason rose to the occasion faster than anyone expected. His leadership wasn't loud. It was steady. He asked before ordering. He listened before deciding. Most importantly, he never forgot what it felt like to be overlooked. The delivery schedule was redesigned from scratch. No one had to work alone anymore. No more marathon shifts disguised as helping out. Each new policy didn't just streamline operations, it lifted the burden from every tired sigh. The kitchen ran more smoothly. The register line moved faster. Customers noticed the difference. One elderly man left a handwritten note on a napkin. "This place finally feels human again." One afternoon, Jackson sat in his regular booth near the window, reviewing reports on his tablet. Sales had stabilized, staff turnover dropped significantly, customer ratings had climbed from 2 to 4 stars in just 3 weeks. Jason approached, carrying a small delivery bag. "Did you order something?" Jackson asked with a smile. "No," Jason said, grinning. "It's from the whole team." Jackson raised an eyebrow in curiosity, then opened the bag. Inside, a still warm pizza box sat topped with a folded handwritten note in bold marker. "Thanks for actually listening." Jackson looked up, speechless. Jason shrugged. "We figured it's the least we could do." Jackson nodded, his throat tight. After years chasing numbers and expansion, it was a $10.00 pizza and a piece of paper that reminded him why he started. He set the box aside and watched the store in action. Alyssa guiding a new hire through the menu with kindness and patience. In that moment, Jackson realized he had rebuilt the most important thing: trust. Trey was joking with a new recruit near the oven, laughter so free it was almost foreign to Jackson. Jason, back at the prep station, wiped his hands on his apron, focused and calm. Jackson sank into the familiar corner of the dining area, the warm lights casting a soft glow over everything. He whispered to himself, "I'll make sure it stays this way." He wasn't just talking about pizza. He was talking about people. And for the first time in years, Jackson felt he wasn't running a business. He was leading a community. That quiet moment, before the phones rang, before the rush of orders began, gave Jason a sense of control, a feeling that he was doing something that mattered. Alyssa was slicing green peppers. Trey was prepping the counter. Both looked at ease, no more flinching every time the back door swung open, no more scanning the schedule like it spelled doom. They didn't need to say it. Their every movement spoke volumes. By 11 a.m., the first wave of customers drifted in. Jason manned the front counter, juggling online orders while greeting familiar faces by name. He noticed the small things. A new employee fumbling at the register. Jason moved over gently to help. A new driver struggling with a delivery bag. Jason didn't lash out. He guided him with calm words and patient eyes. That's where the difference lay. He didn't lead with fear. He led by showing up. Mid-shift, Jackson dropped in unexpectedly. He said little, rolled up his sleeves, helped Trey stack boxes, wiped down a counter. Jason glanced his way, nodded quietly. No fanfare needed. Trust was growing, quietly and steadily. Later, Jackson watched as Jason diffused a small dispute. One employee had accidentally grabbed 2 orders. The other was caught up with the backlog. No yelling, Jason simply listened, then found a solution. 10 minutes later, both were laughing again. Jackson leaned against the soda machine, arms crossed, nodding to himself. This was real leadership. Jason, who had nearly walked away, was now the glue holding everything together. That evening, after closing, Jackson called a short meeting. No one left. Everyone stayed by choice. Standing near the register, his voice steady and low, Jackson said, "I just want to say thank you to all of you. These past few weeks have taught me more than any spreadsheet or executive report ever did." Some nodded, others remained silent, but their eyes were locked on him. This store isn't perfect, and maybe it never will be, but right now, it's better, because of you. He turned to Jason, especially because of one person who stood up when everything was falling apart. Jason shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the spotlight. "I didn't really stand up. I just didn't want it to get worse." Jackson smiled softly. Sometimes true leadership starts exactly there. Jason scanned the room. Faces that had once seen him as just that night shift delivery guy now looked at him with respect. "I just didn't want us to go back to the way things were," he said quietly. "We won't," Jackson replied, and this time they believed it. As everyone cleared and locked up, Jason lingered, walking the floor one last time. He straightened chairs, organized the prep station, folded stray pizza boxes. This job wasn't heavy anymore. It was something worth protecting. Jackson stood by the door, ready to go. Jason nodded. "Yeah." They stepped outside into the cool night air. Jackson said, "I mean what I said. If you ever feel this place slipping back, I want to know. No chain of command, no filters." Jason glanced at him, serious. "You'll actually listen?" Jackson met his gaze steadily. "Last time, I listened, didn't I?" Jason didn't respond. No need. He locked the door, and for the first time, it truly felt like his store. A few weeks later, the change was undeniable. The store wasn't perfect, but it was alive again. The tension that once clung to the air like burnt cheese was now replaced with a rhythm of calm, steady progress. Employees arrived early, not out of fear, but because they wanted the place to thrive. They joked with each other, helped one another out, traded shifts without arguing. Mistakes still happened. A burnt pizza, a missed order. But now, mistakes were met with responsibility, not blame. Customers noticed. Reviews steadily climbed. One woman wrote, "I used to hate this location. Now it's the only place I trust. Whoever's managing, don't let 'em leave." In the kitchen, new hires were carefully trained. Jason even set up a morning kickoff huddle, just 2 minutes each day, no scripts, no fluff. But it worked. And Jackson, he kept his word. He showed up. Sometimes it was just for a single slice, sometimes to roll out dough, sometimes just to sit in his usual booth and quietly watch the people who were now making the place better than he ever had. On one of those afternoons, between orders, Jason walked over and gently placed something in front of Jackson. It wasn't a report. It wasn't a complaint. It was a small framed photo. Lissa, Trey, the new hires, even Jason with a smear of tomato sauce still on his sleeve, smiling brightly. They were huddled behind the counter, holding up a pizza box like it was a championship trophy. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Jason simply said, "We figured this belonged in your office." Jackson stared at the picture for a long while. He didn't say much, just nodded, a bit slower than usual. "I forgot how much this all meant," he finally whispered. Jason shrugged, smiling. "We didn't." And that was the moment, that quiet, powerful shift. From me to us. From founder to teammate. From distance to trust. That night, Jackson didn't return to his executive suite. Instead, he took a seat in the modest break room next to the accounting office. The framed photo sat beside his coffee on a chipped plastic table. He opened his notebook, not to draft policies, but to capture principles. The first line he wrote was simple: "You can't run a company from a spreadsheet." The second: "If you don't listen, people will stop trying." The third: "Great leaders don't fix everything. They empower others to fix it themselves." The next morning, a company Wastewise email went out. Not about sales targets or profit charts, but about the culture he was rebuilding. A culture that began in one store, with one delivery driver who almost gave up, now a manager. And with a location once steeped in fatigue, now a model for what's possible. All because someone finally listened. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who's ever worked a shift no one noticed, but still showed up because they believed in something bigger than themselves.